Hey everyone! I wanted to do an audio tutorial on the literature review, which will be your requirement for completing the environmental course. And so I just wanted to give you a brief background on what it looks like, what it should contain. So this will help you along the way on your research journey. So let's get started. The first question to ask is, why review the literature? And we review the literature to examine the problem area. So first we identify a broad problem area, and then after reviewing the literature is when we can begin to narrow down the problem area. You can also decide to replicate a study, either strict replication or modified replication. Modified replication being the methodology tweaked a little bit, whereas strict replication would, basically replicate the study that somebody else has already performed to kind of validate the results that they've obtained. You can also choose to resolve a conflict between conflicting topics. For example, somebody right now is researching using natural gas as a transitional fuel, and from what I understand, there's conflicting evidence that supports that it is and supports that it isn't. So literature review can be used to help resolve that conflict. You can also review the literature to find a gap in the research, meaning an area that hasn't been studied yet. So a novel area. You should be able to find the gaps in the discussion section of other journals or other sources, other studies, because in the discussion section is where you will find the limitations and future trends. So sometimes the authors of the study use that area to offer up some future ideas on, areas that haven't been studied yet. So new researchers can find a gap in the research that way also. You can also review the literature to identify effective measurement tools to avoid dead ends. So in this case, you will try and use the literature review to answer your question or problem. If you were actually going to perform the research, what your number one goal is to not use the lit review to answer your question, okay? Because if you're able to answer your question and you're performing novel research, you can't actually take the next step forward because your question or problem has been answered already. The purpose of a lit review is to give background information on your topic proposal, and then you use the literature to support, reject, supplement, or demonstrate a gap within existing literature. In other words, most importantly, the literature review is to provide an extension, which is the key word here, of the existing literature. Okay, you're not replicating, you're not rehashing what other people have said. You're taking what other people have said and stretching the line. Okay, you're extending their knowledge, and you're giving back to the profession by performing a lit review. This isn't a term paper or like a book review where you use your sources to restate and to mesh them together, but instead you use these sources to write an extension or analysis, a synthesis of the existing literature, so that you're adding something, okay? And you use it to justify the reason for pursuing your research topic and problem area. Remember, the problem area is inherently negative, so there has to be a reason why you're performing this research, because eventually it will benefit the profession in some way, shape, or form. Some ideas on how to begin would be to first and foremost go back to your question. Remember what the problem is. It can be really easy to get lost on the way because you can find lots of different information, right? And you get really excited about all this different information, and all of a sudden you're up to like 50 pages and you're thinking, what the heck happened? Okay, so when you go back to your question, that's why it was really important that we made your questions or hypotheses specific, so that every time you feel like you're straying, you just go back to the question, and then automatically you know where to go from there. You can provide evidence to support why the problem is important. So, for example, is the problem increasing? Is the problem causing more deaths or disease? Okay. Writing the literature review, some food for thought, right, would be to write a clear and concise introduction. The introduction is very important, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You want to find quality sources not older than 7 years, and these quality sources would be, for example, peer-reviewed journals, large population studies, or organizational sources such as the CDC or the NIH. And your source is not older than 7 years is important because things change, right? They change over time. Unless you can justify using something that's older than 7 years. For example, I have a student right now who's researching a shortage in a pharmaceutical in 2001 and comparing that to our current shortage in 2013 and 14. So since it's a comparison study, he of course needs to have sources that are around the year 2001, maybe a year earlier and a few years later, and that's greater than 7 years, but he's justified it. When you're writing the lit review, you want to mix, match, and mesh sources within each paragraph. Okay, you don't want to segregate your sources. It's never good to segregate, right? So your paragraph should be a synthesis of multiple sources and multiple studies. You also want to use scientific tone and APA levels of heading. And APA levels of heading are used for organization, which you recently learned. It's always difficult to begin, so I like to suggest maybe using a statistic, which to me is the easiest way to begin and to demonstrate why the problem is important. Is the problem, again, increasing or decreasing, or do we have a higher incidence of deaths, right? But remember, the statistic has to support the problem, okay? It can't be something off the wall, right? And it also must be relevant to the sample population. If you're about to discuss a problem with the elderly, don't give me a statistic on minors, something affecting minors. Okay, it has to be specific to the actual problem and the sample population. You may also want to begin by defining an important variable. Okay, so some variables need to be defined, right? For example, performance or access to care. What does that mean exactly? What does performance mean? Because performance can mean different things to different people, and also different things in different circumstances. Okay, athletic performance versus, organizational performance, etc. And you must also think critically, okay? Remember, this is not a term paper or a book review. You're not rehashing what other people have said. You are analyzing literature and studies, pointing out things that are important and things that, don't make sense or need review further. I like that little emoticons always make me happy. I try to put them in, often. There are certain parts to the lit review. Okay, the title, of course, which is derived from your question. The abstract, which is written last. The introduction, which is implied, remember, not labeled. So it's assumed that the first section of the lit review, the actual words after the abstract, is the intro. Okay, and there isn't the word introduction in APA style. You then have your background, which defines those variables and goes into more detail about the problem. Anything that the reader needs to know about the problem itself. Then we have the review of literature, which is the meat and potatoes essentially, or the body. Then there's the conclusion, right? Because anytime that you write, you always want to pull everything together into one nice, neat little package. Of course, you have to have references, okay, because it is a review of literature. And then tables and figures if you've used them to supplement. The title then is specific and clear, usually in statement form. Okay, and it's derived from your question, essentially, or your hypothesis. The abstract is one succinct paragraph, 150 to 250 words. It's written last because it includes everything in your study. Okay, basically an analysis of everything in your study. So the objective or the purpose, the materials and methods, which you probably won't have, but you will have a discussion, maybe a conclusion, maybe results, and definitely your conclusions. Okay, the abstract is broken up into those sections, into one paragraph that's about 250 words. Next, what I like to call the pre-literature review, which is the introduction and background combination. Again, the introduction doesn't have a header, but here is where you state the importance of the problem. You can use statistics or define key variables, and this is where you demonstrate evidence to support the problem. Think about the introduction as an overall, proposal, okay? So if you were sending this to a funding agency, your introduction is of utmost importance, okay? Because this is where the funding agency will look at this and say, is the problem important? Does the evidence demonstrate that the problem is important, right? Will I, give out money for this research to be conducted? And all of this occurs in the introduction. So it needs to be powerful and persuasive. And you do that with the evidence. Here is also where you will write your purpose statement. So basically, what are you trying to accomplish, determine, investigate? And you can literally say, the purpose of this research is to determine blah, blah, blah. Or the purpose of this research is to investigate. Okay? You may also choose to include a goal statement, meaning how the profession used the results, or how does the profession benefit. So the purpose of performing research is essentially for the benefit of the profession or the society. And so your goal is a future idea. How do you want your results to be used in the greater population? Moving on to the background, you have an overview of the background information for important items that the readers must know. At the end of the background, the reader should have no question about what you're about to do research on. Okay, and remember your audience when writing the background. So go into a little bit more detail or a little less detail based on your audience. Discuss the parameters of the problem. Here is where you will also want to provide definitions, and then you want to separate it out using the headers, right? Because the headers is for organization. Next comes the body, or the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, okay? This is where, everything goes down, right? All of the body is supported by literature, but remember it's written in your own voice. Here's where you'll group sources into common categories or topics. Remember, don't segregate. You should have a nice little weaving of sources, 3 or 4 sources within each paragraph. Try not to segregate and say study A said this, study B said this, study C said that, etc. Try and mesh them by topic and not by source. Some things to consider. Remember that all studies have limitations and are therefore flawed in some way. And the authors will list, what they feel was a limitation in their study, usually in the discussion section. Okay, because this isn't theory, right? We're not proving anything. We're providing evidence to support. Okay, and this also means that not all sources have the same weight. So a lot of sources some sources are more flawed than others. Okay, some Some people use methodology that, doesn't quite work. And so it's really important to use your language, okay, or wording, so that the reader knows, okay, this source has weight, this one's kind of a little iffy, okay? So if I said, source A clearly indicates, I really am digging this source, right? If I say that it only provides some evidence, then, well, this source was important enough to put in my paper, my lit review, but it doesn't provide that much evidence, okay? So using your words is important. If you don't include that modifier, the reader assumes that the source is sound. Okay, it gives the same weight to a sound source. The lit review should synthesize the topic or provide evidence on what is known and what is not known. Okay. Again, don't segregate, synthesize, right? Right? Topic to topic, not source to source. Another thing that you may consider doing within the body would be to offer explanations of major discrepancies in studies. So, for example, while Miller clearly indicates participants were significantly affected, Chopin demonstrates participants were only mildly affected. Though both use the same methodology, this could be a result of improvement in the tools used to gather data or use of differing data analyses or processing techniques. So, I've laid out that, while the same methodology was used, these two sources came up with differing results. Why? Why do I think that is? And I provided my own, a suggestion based on my analysis of why I think that is. Okay, so you can use it to offer explanations of discrepancies. What you don't want to do, though, when you're doing that, something like that, is to write out each methodology, okay, unless it's relevant, right, unless you're documenting some weakness or differing results. You don't want to sit there and say, Morris used technique A, where participants were broken up into groups of 5, etc. Participants were then examined. They were then asked how they felt about drinking the water. Data was gathered. No. Too much. Doesn't work. Just, basically cut to the chase, okay? In the body, you want to use quotes sparingly because when you use quotes, you break up the flow of the paper. You also want to make sure that your quote is powerful. Okay, don't quote something that doesn't have any weight behind it. Instead, provide summaries and paraphrases. Okay, you should not have more than 3 or 4 quotes in your 15-page paper. If you start having all of these quotes, then you're not putting the literature in your own words. And if you don't do that, then you're not doing, analyzing or synthesizing. And if you're not analyzing or synthesizing, then you're not writing a literature review. Okay, you're just copying and pasting. It's also important to use transition words like therefore, indeed, as a consequence, as a result. And this is for flow purposes. Okay, so we want it to be nice and flowy, right? Not choppy. Okay, it's really hard to read choppy. Next, we have the conclusion. You never want to end something that you've written without a synopsis. Okay, one paragraph that reiterates the main points of your lit review. There are no citations in the conclusion. It's basically just a summary of general important conclusions that you found within, the literature. It is literally 4 to 5 sentences. Okay, it should not be a whole page, and it should not be more than 1 paragraph. And there are no citations. All right, and it'll go as a level 1 heading. The conclusion will be a level 1 header. You also want to use the conclusion as the grand slam. Okay, the conclusion, just like the introduction, must be powerful, right? Most of the time, the conclusion is a lead into the materials and methods section. In this case, you won't be performing the research, so it's, you won't have a lead into the materials and methods section. However, it still needs to, be presented in a manner that is powerful. The next is references. For APA, this is important. You only want to include the references that are cited within the text. If you didn't cite it, you shouldn't have that source in your references section. And vice versa. If it's in your references section, you should use it. If you don't use it, don't put it in there. Don't put it in your references section. The references are in alphabetical order. There are no numbers. Okay, this AMA uses numbers, right? APA uses author last name. So it needs to be in alphabetical order if I'm, to find the source. And I won't be searching. I know my alphabet, so I'm all set, right? APA format, of course, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. You can also find APA format on APA Purdue OWL website. Excellent website for formatting in APA style. The Lit Review, if you want to have tables and figures, they are included at the end of the paper after the references, and they must be referenced in the text. You shouldn't put your table and figure in the spot where it goes in the paper. What you need to do is say, as demonstrated or as illustrated in figure 1. And then the reader will scroll all the way down to the end of the paper after the references section and locate figure 1. So they must be referenced in the text and occur in the order in which they appear. Okay? You should always do figure 1, 2, 3, 4, and label, accordingly, of course. Tables and figures require a title, a caption, and a title, a caption. A caption explains exactly what's happening, and they should follow APA format. Here's a useful template. You have the title, the abstract, or the title page, and then the abstract, which is written last, remember, and then the title again. The introduction paragraph, remember the introduction is implied, it's not labeled, but it's still there. The background information, which provides definitions and a basic overview of the problem, answers any questions the reader may have before going into the literature analysis. Body next would be the synthesis of the literature, followed by the conclusion, references, and then tables and figures. In the editing phase of the Lit Review, here are some of the questions that I will be looking at, or asking myself as I'm reading these. Okay, and so therefore you should probably ask yourself, kind of use this like a rubric, right? Is there thorough coverage of the literature provided? As a reader, am I left questioning about anything? Okay, was recent research reports cited? Less than 7 years, unless there's special circumstances. Was there a reliance on appropriate materials? Meaning, did the author use primary sources? Was it organized? Did I get lost along the way? Was there good flow? Okay, it's really difficult to kind of get into the material. If the grammar isn't working out or the flow is really bad. Was the correct APA format used and properly edited? Is the style of the review appropriate? Did you use scientific tone? Does the reviewer paraphrase? I'm telling you, if you have more than 4 quotes, that's an over-reliance on quotes. Okay, so try and paraphrase as much as possible. And your quotes, again, should be very powerful. Was the need supported for new research? If a new study or protocol is proposed. If the review is designed to guide clinical practice, does the review of the evidence support the need for changes? Does the review appear unbiased? Remember, it's important to maintain objectivity. Okay, you're using the literature, and the literature should be presented as objective and not subjective. Does the reviewer use appropriate language? Meaning, are you weighing your sources correctly? Remember never to use the word prove, okay? You want to say evidence supports, not evidence proves, because studies are inherently flawed. You've omitted phrases and useless adverbs and adjectives and used scientific tone. Most of the time you can change phrases, into one word. Okay, and scientific tone is just the bones, right? It's straightforward. Okay, there's no fluffy stuff. So I tried to put in that song, you know, let's get it started, and then it was an epic failure. So I just said cue the Black Eyed Peas. But in any case, let me know if you have any questions on, you know, the literature review. Hopefully, you know, this tutorial was helpful and you know, beneficial and not too long and boring. In any case, let us know if you have any questions, and there are some excellent studies thus far. I'm really excited to read these. I think all of them will certainly be beneficial and provide, you know, new insights into the existing literature. And so I'm really excited to get to read some of these studies. So keep up the good work. Let me know if you have any questions.